Rule is a phenomenon that has occupied humanity since time immemorial. Plato already recognized that the rule of the many is dangerous when it proceeds without wisdom, and that only the rule of the best can be just. Aristotle emphasized that power is legitimized not solely through laws, but above all through the consent of the governed. Thomas Hobbes viewed human nature in such a way that people surrender their freedom in order to gain security, for without rule, chaos prevails. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, by contrast, defined freedom not as doing whatever one wishes, but as not being subjected to the arbitrary will of others. Niccolò Machiavelli advised that it's better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both at the same time. Max Weber stressed that rule lies in the capacity to produce obedience, while Karl Marx observed that the rule of the bourgeoisie rests not only on violence, but on control over the means of production and ideas. Michel Foucault elaborated that power is not merely repressive, but permeates social life and shapes knowledge, behavior, and norms, while Antonio Gramsci described the maintenance of rule through cultural hegemony. Ralph Waldo Emerson added that control over laws simultaneously means control over people's thoughts. In politics, rule reveals itself in its most practical form. George Orwell warned that whoever controls the past controls the future, and that whoever controls the present controls the past. Aldous Huxley pointed out that rule often operates more subtly through pleasure and distraction than through violence. Benjamin Franklin recognized that the power of a state lies not in its canons, but in the consent of its citizens. John Locke noted that there is no tyranny without the participation of the subjugated, and Alexis de Tocqueville pointed out that political power grows through the conviction of the governed. Eric Hobsbawm observed that historically, freedom is the exception and rule the norm, while Lord Acton coined the famous maxim, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Hannah Arendt emphasized that rule is the result of complex structures, and Cesare Beccaria reminded us that fear of punishment is the weakest reason to obey a law. Simón Bolívar ultimately saw that rebellion arises not from a hunger for freedom, but from a hunger for justice. Literature reflects the psychological and social dimensions of rule in a striking way. Franz Kafka wrote that power is opaque and that no one knows whose will they obey. George Orwell added that everything that can be grasped can be controlled, and that control destroys everything that is alive. Margaret Atwood observed that rule reveals itself in the small rituals of everyday life, and Ursula K. Le Guin described how submission often occurs through the stories people tell themselves. Ray Bradbury noted that whoever controls language controls thought, while Albert Camus emphasized that rule is often invisible because it inscribes itself into habits and norms. Alexandre Dumas regarded the tyranny of the majority as often more subtle than that of an individual. Victor Hugo recognized that the violence of rulers is only as strong as the fear of the ruled, and Jean-Paul Sartre stated that human freedom ends where rule begins. Bertolt Brecht ultimately described rule as a theater. Many play roles, but few pull the strings. Psychology and sociology illuminate the mechanisms behind submission. Stanley Milgram showed that power exists where someone obeys, and obedience exists where someone allows themselves to be controlled. Solomon Asch recognized that many people follow the crowd because they shy away from responsibility for their own judgment. Erich Fromm explained that submission is often more comfortable than freedom, and Hannah Arendt observed that rule arises when people relinquish responsibility for their own freedom. Philip Zimbardo added that people allow themselves to be ruled because it is easier to follow rules than to think for themselves. Noam Chomsky pointed out that the greatest power lies in the manipulation of perception. Michel Foucault noted that social control often operates more subtly than physical violence, and Pierre Bourdieu argued that every society produces norms that stabilize rule. Simone de Beauvoir defined freedom as the awareness that no one rules over you, while Alice Miller emphasized that submission occurs when individuals give up their own voice. In the modern world, rule becomes ever more complex. David Graeber observed that rule exists wherever people voluntarily submit to rules they do not understand. Noam Chomsky added that the most effective form of rule is the one that makes us believe we are free. Shoshana Zuboff pointed out that technology strengthens power structures because it facilitates surveillance and control. Bourdieu explained that rule is a game of symbols and rituals. Immanuel Wallerstein emphasized that empires are merely the visible tip of global power relations. And Laozi wrote that those who rule do so only because others allow it. Erich Fromm reminded us that the subjugation of the mind is more enduring than that of the body. Antonio Gramsci added that rule consists in getting others to defend one's own interests. And Václav Havel warned that freedom is not given, but must be continually fought for. Michel de Montaigne finally reminded us that whoever knows themselves recognizes the chains that surround them. Thus it becomes clear, rule is neither monolithic nor simple. It permeates laws, norms, thoughts, rituals, and everyday habits. It is visible and invisible, subtle and brutal, voluntary and coerced at the same time. Power and control exist wherever people believe they must obey, believe, or command, and freedom is always the process of recognizing, questioning, and breaking through these structures.